Converting back and forth between percents, decimals, and fractions is critical. Let's start off with a few examples. If you have 0.85 as a value and you want to write that as a percentage, many of you know, multiply that value by 100 or move the decimal 2 places to the right, and that would give you 85%. If you were required to change that original number, 0.85, into a fraction, it's not recommended that you go from the percentage stage. It's recommended you go from the decimal stage, and you'll see why in a little bit. 0.85 is the last digits in the hundredths place, so it becomes 85 over 100, which you kind of knew, but this is a rule, and you have to reduce. 5 goes into 85 17 times. 5 goes into 100 20 times. So 17 out of 20 is the same thing as getting 85 out of 100, or getting 85%, or getting 0.85 on an assessment. They're all the same. If you had got as a value a bad one, 0.476, and you were required to convert that into a percentage, that's the same thing as saying 47.6%. To change from a decimal to a percentage, you multiply it by 100. Now to change this into a fraction, here's where the problem comes if you use the percentage. You would have 47.6 over 100, and you can't have decimals in the middle of a fraction. I recommend and insist that you use the decimal value to start. In this question, the 6 is in the thousandths place, so the answer is going to become 476 over 1,000, because it's tenths, hundredths, this is the thousandths position. Then you have to reduce your fraction. Maybe you'll start by reducing it by 2's. By 2's, 500 would be the denominator. The numerator would be 238. If you break it down one more time, because they're still both even, you would get 119 over 250. So the lesson in this question is always convert from the decimal to the fraction. Do not use your percentages. Decimals to fractions. Decimals to fractions. Okay, how about the next one? If I gave you a value of 12.1275. Clearly that's a decimal. There's no percentage sign with it. And I asked you to convert that into a percentage. The rules don't change just because the numbers look wacky. Multiply it by 100. So you would have 12.75%. That's a very large percentage. Be nice if you can get that kind of growth on your money in a bank account, but it doesn't work that way. If I ask you to convert this into a fraction, that's a whole number 12 and a portion. So you always go from the decimal. So 12, then you have 1275 over tenths, hundredths, thousands, 10 thousandths. So it's 10 thousandths on the bottom. Now, if your calculator cannot reduce this number, you can do it longhand. Say divide them both by 25. But to save time, the answer is the whole number 12 and 51 over 400. Use your calculator to check. If you take 51 and divide it by 400, you're going to get the original answer back of 0.1275. So that's the decimal portion. This is the fraction portion of the same thing, and the whole number 12 didn't change. What if you had been given a fraction to start? Let's just say your team received a score of 54 out of 60 on your team test. and I asked you to figure out what that was as a decimal and a percentage. So you would just simply pick up your calculator and divide 54 by 60. I'm never going to ask you to divide longhand. 54 divided by 60 is going to come up as 0.9 on the calculator. To change a decimal to a percentage and multiply it by 100, that's the equivalent of 90%. Pretty straightforward. If I gave you a question where I saw a score, let's just say, on a team test that was a little bit lower, 49 to the 60, and I want you to convert that into a decimal, you would take 49 divided by 60, and you would get on your calculator 0.81666, and so on. Your last digit really should not be a 7. If your calculator rounds that last one up to a 7, it's kind of crappy. And you're always going to be required at this stage to answer a question. It's either going to tell you how to round, or it's going to say exact. And I'll show you both ways. If it asks you to round, you would round to the appropriate place. If I wanted you to round the nearest tenths, then you would round your answer to be 0.8. If I want you to round to the nearest hundredths, you were going to have to round the 6 and deal with the 6. 0.816, the 6 is greater than 5, so it's going to be 0.82. Remember, rounded answers are not exact. If you went to the nearest thousands, the digit in the thousands place is another 6. So you're going to have 0.81666 or 0.817 when you round the second 6 to the first 6. Those are all rounded answers. None of them are really all that close. If I asked you to give me an exact answer, then you would do repeating notation, and it would be 0.816 with a bar over only 1 6, because the 6 is what repeats. If I wanted you to give it to me as a percentage, you would multiply by 100 and say 81.6%. And those are, the last two are exact, the first three are rounded. If you had a question where your fraction was not quite so nice and neat, like say 2 over 7, again you'd have to round, because 2 over 7 does not come up as an even decimal. You get 0.285, 7, 1, 4, 2, 9. Therefore, the instructions will be important. Do I want the nearest tenths? Do I want the nearest hundredths? Let's say I want the nearest hundredths. Your answer would be 0.29 as a decimal. If I wanted the percentage to the nearest hundredths, then you got to be really careful. Multiply by 100 first, so you would get 28.571429. Then you would round, so it will become 28.57%, and that's rounded as a percentage to the nearest hundredths. If your question was a mixed number, like 2 1/8, you want to write that as a decimal, it's a whole number 2 and then a portion of the next whole, and 1 divided by 8 is 0.125. So as a decimal, that becomes 2.125. To change that into a percentage, multiply by 100, you get 212.5%. There's some practice from decimals to percents, decimals to fractions, and fractions to decimals and percents. the next video we'll do percents backwards.